I did say we would get back to this and I forgot. However, I do need to point out one or two things to you. Next week is the lighting up day for Prestwick next Sunday, when the Christmas lights go on, and there's loads of celebrations and things in and around Prestwick. It's a great day, and if it's a day like this, it's going to be fantastic. We've got some activities on in the church hall. We've got games to do and things to make and to paint and all of that kind of stuff, and we have tea and coffee and shortbread. I'm looking for Sandy, but she's away. Tea and coffee and shortbread and mince pies and things through there, just as part of that day. There's lots going on, and if you can spare us just a few minutes to come in and have a bit of fun here, that would be great. We've also got a bit in the hall where you can get dressed in a costume, a Christmas nativity story costume, Mary, Joseph, Shepherd, King, Angel, that kind of thing. And we'll take your picture and stick it online for you to download later. Just some interesting things to do. Our Christmas fair in the church is the 25th of November, and we're looking for folks to help to provide some home baking. So if you can do that, can you see Leslie Keenan, who is our session clerk, and give us a wave, Leslie. That's Leslie, if you don't know Leslie. If you can help with some home baking, if you let her know, that would be really great. Also, I was told that there's a mistake there. I think in the Ayrshire Hospice Christmas concert, I think is Saturday the 25th and not Saturday the 26th. I'm sure you could have worked that one out yourselves. Over these last few weeks, we've been working through John's Gospel. And I don't know about anybody else, but I've enjoyed it at least. John describes lots of circumstances and situations that people find themselves in. He tells us things that Jesus said that point to the fact that he is, in fact, the Son of God, the one through whom we can have eternal life and through whom we have hope for the future. In fact, in John chapter 20, near the end of his book, he says this: Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples that are not recorded in this book. But these things are written so that you might believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you might have life in his name. So John has chosen these things that he has written about specifically because they point to Jesus and because they tell us that Jesus really is God's Son. So it's a great book to read if you want to find out who Jesus is. But he's actually quite a good writer. And so he tells the story in a way that makes you have to think, why has he put that there? What does that really tell us about Jesus? And he gives clues and hints that he calls signs all the way through the book. It's quite a long book, so our reading today actually cuts in halfway through the story. And we read the first bit last week, but we didn't actually get to it because there was just too much. So we're halfway through this story today in the reading. In the earlier part that we didn't get to today, we're told that Jesus and his friends had left the area around Jerusalem and Judea because the people there wanted to kill him. They'd just had enough. He had annoyed them so much that they were going to stone him to death. And so it wasn't safe for him to be there, and he left with his friends. And they went east, down into the Jordan Valley and onto the other side of the River Jordan, and they were staying over there. Well, they were staying there, and news came to Jesus that his friend Lazarus was really ill. And he knew Lazarus really well, and he knew that Lazarus had two sisters who were called Mary and Martha. And Mary and Martha we've seen earlier in the story. One is really busy all the time, fussing and getting things organized and doing. She's always active. And the other one is very quiet and reflective. So they're quite different, although they're sisters. And if you have brothers and sisters in your family, you'll know that that's very often the case. They're often really quite different. And you wonder where on earth they've come from because they're so different. My boys are like that. I don't know what happened, but there we are. But then John tells us that Jesus received this news, and he did something really odd. Really odd. John chapter 11, verses 5 to 7, it says this. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. That's brilliant. He loved them. You would expect somebody who loved you, when they found out that you're really ill, to just come and to be there to support you and to encourage you. But what does it say? No, Jesus stayed where he was. When he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 days. Huh? What's that about? Why would you do that? And after 2 days, he says to his disciples, okay, now let's go back to Judea. He doesn't even say, let's go back to see Lazarus. He just says, let's go back to Judea. You know, I honestly don't think that God plays games with people. However, his ways are not our ways, and his timings are not our timings. I want everything right now. And I sometimes pray for people who come and they say that there's something wrong with them, and they ask for prayer for healing. And I pray and I say, God, right now, would you heal them right now? And sometimes God does. And sometimes God doesn't. And I find that really difficult. I find that really hard to understand, because I want it right now. But sometimes God doesn't do what I want. Imagine. What's he thinking of? Jesus got the message, and he didn't even prepare to go. We're not even told if he sent a message back to them to say that he would come. He simply stayed where he was, and then in Bethany, Mary and Martha watched their brother die. What on earth was he doing? Why, when he loved them, would he not just rush? They had seen Jesus do all of these miracles. They had seen him cure people, to make people better. A couple of chapters back, we've got a story of a blind man, and Jesus made him see. So they would know that he could have done something for Lazarus. What was he thinking? Do you know, I think what he was doing was praying. I think he was trying to understand what God wanted him to do in that circumstance. He knew that he was going to be taken prisoner, that he was going to go to Jerusalem and he was going to be captured and he was going to be killed. And he had to work out, is this the time? Is this the right thing to do? I love Lazarus, but I need to do what God wants me to do. And I think it was a real struggle for Jesus. I think he was praying. He knew that the people around Bethany wanted to kill him. And so this story is not just about Lazarus and Mary and Martha. It's a story also about Jesus. The chapter begins with the disciples warning him not to go back because they were trying to kill him. And it ends with the high priest, the most important religious person in the country, declaring that one person will have to die for everybody. And so when Jesus, in our reading, thanked his Father that he had heard this prayer, I think he's referring to the prayers during these 2 days. Of course, he was praying for Lazarus. Lazarus was his friend. We all pray, or we should all pray, for our friends. But I think he was also praying for wisdom and guidance for himself, for his own plans and his own movements. Because you see, what Jesus ended up doing for Lazarus became one of the main reasons that the people wanted to kill him. They couldn't explain how he had managed to do what he had done. They couldn't believe that what he said was true, and so they had to get rid of him. And later on in the story, we discover that they tried to get rid of Lazarus as well, because they can't have him hanging about. This story is actually about the ways in which Jesus surprises people and overturns their expectations. He didn't go when the sisters would have expected him to go, but he did go when the disciples told him not to go. He spoke about sleep, and they thought he meant that Lazarus was sleeping. And they had to say, no, he's dead. And then he told them this really odd story about people who walk in the daytime, that they don't trip up, but people who walk in the dark do. And he seems to have meant that actually the only way to know where you're going was to follow him. If you try to go your own way and your own understanding, you'll trip up because you're actually in the dark. But if you stick close to him and see things from his point of view, even if it means days or even years of questioning and puzzlement, wondering why nothing seems to be working out the way you think it should, that you come out at the right place at the end. I don't know if you've ever had an if only moment. If only I hadn't, or usually for me it was, if only I had studied a wee bit more. If I had read that book they're going to ask me questions about now, that would be quite useful. If only I hadn't said that. If only we hadn't decided to go on holiday right then. If only. Well, when Jesus finally gets to Bethany, Martha comes to meet him with an if only. John 11:21. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if only you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. If only. And she's looking and thinking how much better it would be. And she doesn't realize that actually Jesus is something even better than she would imagine. By this time, Lazarus has been dead for 3 days. But instead of looking to the past and thinking what might have been, Jesus invites her to look to the future. In John chapter 11, verse 23, he says to her, your brother will rise again. Now, that's the thing that people understood in those days. That resurrection was something they expected, that God was going to make a new heaven and a new earth, and that one day we would all go and live there. So they expected to have people rise from the dead. They were expecting a world like ours, only with its beauty and power enhanced and its pain, its ugliness and grief done away with. So Martha answers, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. But that's the kind of answer that tells you it's not really much help. That's something for a way, way, way down the line in the future. But it doesn't help her right there when she's grieving. But she isn't prepared for Jesus' response, because for her, right there, right then, the future bursts into the present. The new creation with the resurrection has come forward from the end of time into her time. Jesus hasn't just come from heaven to earth. He also came from God's future into our present, into the mess and the muddle of this world that we know. Jesus said to her in John 11:25 and 26, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Those are words that I say at every funeral that I take, because I believe that there is hope for the future through faith in Christ. I believe that there will one day be resurrection, but I don't think it's just for one day in the future. I think Christ promises us life in all its fullness right here, right now, because he breaks in from the future into the present. And we get little glimpses of glory. Resurrection isn't just a thing we believe. It isn't just a future promise. It's a person. And at that moment, that person is standing right in front of Martha, encouraging her to make the huge jump of trust and of hope, of faith. He's encouraging her to exchange her if only for an if Jesus. If Jesus is who she's beginning to believe he is, if Jesus really is the Messiah, if Jesus really is God's Son, if Jesus really is resurrection and life. And then John breaks off the story a wee bit to give us time to think about it while she goes off to find her sister. She's the active, busy one. Mary, her sister, is the quieter, more reflective one. So Martha rushes off. She has to confront him directly. I'm a bit like that, and I wonder if some of you are a bit like that. Can't wait to tell Jesus what we think of him and question why he hasn't done what we want when we want it and the way we want it. If you're like that, if you have an if only in your heart today, why don't you go to Jesus? Put yourself in Martha's shoes. Metaphorically, go to Jesus and tell him the problem. But be prepared for a surprising answer. I have no idea what the answer will be, because I think it's always a surprise from God. But I do think that Jesus will meet whatever problem you're facing with some new part of God's future that can and will burst into your present with good news, with hope, and with new possibilities. And the key to it all is faith. We have another video clip to show.
To those who chose to be so brave, to those who rest within the grave, to those who fell and did not rise, with bayonets in hand and fear in eyes, to those who lay on Flanders fields, to those blanketed in poppy seeds, to the trench diggers, barbed wire bargers and front foot chargers, to the privates, lieutenants and camped at war tenants, to the ones who didn't make it back alive, may they know John 11:35. To those fighting at sea, sand or land, to those who see war at first hand, to the Normandy landers, to the beach stormers and cliff climbers, to those who lived at the sword and died at the sword, to the war zone patrollers and fresh-faced enrollers, to the heat-seeking missile controllers, to the every generation of soldiers, may their hearts bind to two words from John 11:35. To those with battles back at home, to those isolated and alone, to those who grieve and no loss of sleep, to those with pain that cuts so deep, to those who know the ache of loss, to those who paid such a cost, to those who know loss of their soulmate, to the ones who not yet know their fate, to the thinkers, feelers and mind blockers, to the bedridden and rage-driven, to the unforgiven and unforgiven, to those whose joy was long left behind, may they know John 11:35. To those who fight for what is right, to those who long to reunite, to those who know their time is close, to those who know that pain the most, to those who feel there's nothing left, to those fighting till their final breath, to the cancer bearers and the cancer carers, to the last post players and the hopeless full swayers, to the light searchers, may they find at the end of the tunnel is John 11:35. To those who breathe with lung-filled pain, or wonder why the world is still the same, to those who have given up on faith, to the ones who feel that nowhere's safe, to the ones who see through a suffering mist, to the ones that doubt that God exists, to the screamers, tearers, and silent speakers, to the guilt-built and shame-keepers, may they know that He weeps with us. To those who replay trauma in their mind, may they know John 11:35. May we all know John 11:35.
Some of the biggest cultural differences that we face in the world around us are ways in which we do funerals. In many parts of the world, people still mourn their dead in much the same way they did when Jesus was around. There are processions in the street, people carrying the body along the street to the place of burial. Everyone, particularly the women, crying and wailing in their mourning and their grief. There's wild, sad music to it all. In the West, a funeral is much more contained. Emotions are held in check. And there's something of a move towards a celebration of life rather than a commemoration of death. John 11:35 is the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. Jesus sees the grief of his friends, and he bursts into tears at the moment when he sees Mary and all the people with her in tears. He doesn't sweep into the scene and into this picture, this story, as we might suppose, and then declare that tears are stupid because actually Lazarus is not really dead. He sees their grief, and grief wells up in him in response. Here's someone who understands grief and pain and is able to share it for his friends. And then he stands there in front of that crowd, putting his reputation on the line, and he asks them to take the stone away from the front of the tomb. The tomb's like a cave. And in one of the older versions of the Bible, this is one of my favorite bits, because Martha, in the authorized version, says, "Lord, it stinketh. It's pongy. It's really whiffy," is what she's saying. This guy has been dead for days, and it will be awful. Don't open the tomb. It will stink like nothing else. Even today, people in that part of the world bury their dead as soon as possible, because that's what happens in the heat. But when they remove the stone, John records Jesus as saying this. John 11:41-42. "Father, I thank you that you've heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people who are standing here, so that they might believe that you sent me." We hadn't heard them pray. John didn't say anything about him praying. So what prayer has been heard? He doesn't pray that he'll be able to raise Lazarus. He knows that that's going to happen. And I think it's back to those 2 days when he was praying before. Jesus commands Lazarus to come out of the tomb, and he does. He's still wrapped up in all the bandages that they put round folk when they die in those countries. But there's no more word of a smell, because he is alive again. There's so many pointers in this story to the subsequent death and resurrection of Jesus, and there's differences as well. Jesus also died and was buried in a tomb, but it wasn't people, it was angels who rolled the stone away for him. He didn't emerge wearing his grave clothes. His grave clothes were folded neatly in the tomb. When he did emerge, they didn't recognize him because he had been changed into this new glorious body. Everybody recognized Lazarus once he got the cloths off. Lazarus couldn't bring himself back to life. He needed Jesus to do that for him. But Jesus didn't need anyone else to act on his behalf. Lazarus came back into ordinary human life. He could become ill again. He would die one day again. But Jesus came back into eternal life and took his rightful place in heaven. So today, as we spend time remembering people through history who have sacrificed themselves in war to defend others, who have given themselves fighting to bring the possibility of freedom to so many of us, for those who suffered the loss of a loved one in battle, and in fact, all who have suffered the loss of somebody they love, we need to remember John 11:35. Jesus wept. Jesus understands loss and death. He understands the suffering and the agonies of so many, and his heart broke for them. His was the perfect sacrifice for all people, restoring the possibility of new life with God. Do you know, when I was a boy, they used to say, "Big boys don't cry," as if somehow it was a weakness for men to show emotion, as if somehow it was wrong for a man to cry. You were meant to bottle it all up. And actually, I think that's the weakness. I think tears are a sign of strength. They're a sign of humanity, of compassion. Tears for others are a sign that you are confident of who you are in yourself and with God. I think it's okay to cry. I think if it's okay for Jesus, it's okay for me. But his timing is not our timing. And his ways are not our ways. And in the middle of your difficulties, if you're facing difficulties just now, even if God appears silent, and maybe he seemed that way for much more than 2 days, I need you to know that you're not abandoned. I want you to know that you're not alone. And that's the everlasting promise of God to his people. I believe that Jesus still breaks into the present from the future as he builds his kingdom. I believe that he has the power to transform any and every situation, no matter how dark it might seem. His promise to us is life in all its fullness. And the key to that is the same today as it was for Mary and Martha. Faith. Amen. We're going to sing the hymn, It Is Well With My Soul. Anthem.